Coming up on Arirang News, President Moon-jae-in commemorates the troops who've died to defend South Korea from the north and thanks the military personnel now helping battle the coronavirus. Patriotism, he says, will help the country overcome this crisis too. Countries are rolling out economic stimulus measures, but international credit rating agencies are forecasting that this year will indeed see a global economic recession. And South Korea's biggest companies are temporarily shutting down more factories overseas. Hyundai Motor, Samsung, and LG among those announcing more closures from next week. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. At this point, more than ever, President Moon-jae-in says South Koreans need strong pride in their country to overcome the coronavirus outbreak. He was speaking Friday at an event to commemorate West Sea Defense Day, to remember the South Korean troops who died defending the country against North Korea's provocations. The president said the unyielding sacrifices and devotion of those who died are an important symbol for everyone.
애국심이야말로 가장 튼튼한 안보입니다. 아무도 흔들 수 없는 나라의 기반입니다. 군 장병들의 가슴에 서해 수호 영웅들의 애국심이 이어지고 국민의 기억 속에 애국의 역사가 살아 숨쉬는 한 우리는 어떠한 위기도 극복해낼 수 있습니다.
Moon thanked the military for their efforts to tackle the COVID-19 outbreak, pointing to their volunteer work and donations, as well as the military nurses supporting treatment efforts. He said South Korea is pulling together as a nation through unity and cooperation. This was the first time President Moon has attended the event since taking office, reflecting the government's determination to achieve strong security and lasting peace. It falls on the fourth Friday of March every year and remembers the troops killed in the Second Battle of Yeonpyeong, the sinking of the Cheonan warship, and the shelling of Yeonpyeongdo Island. The provincial government of South Korea's Jeju Island has decided to sue a woman and her mother who traveled to the island despite having symptoms of COVID-19 and later testing positive for it. Jeju-do Province said Thursday that the plaintiffs suing for damages are the local government and businesses and residents who incurred financial losses or had to self-quarantine because of the defendants. The provincial government said there were grounds for a suit because the woman, a college student studying in the U.S., had returned to Korea on March 15th but did not go into self-quarantine. Instead, she went to Jeju Island with her mother and 2 other people. She felt symptoms on the first day there, visited a hospital, and then tested positive on March 24th when she went back to Seoul. Her mother tested positive the next day. Global credit ratings agencies say there's a worldwide recession on the way because of the coronavirus pandemic. Governments around the world are rolling out record-breaking stimulus packages to try and stop it, but it seems that won't be enough. Oh Jung-hee reports.
International ratings agencies are warning the coronavirus shock will shrink the world economy and push countries into recession. According to the AFP, S&P Global says the Eurozone and UK economies will shrink by 2% and possibly by up to 10% if the COVID-19 crisis rumbles on for a protracted period. The agency saw Britain and the Eurozone are facing recessions. Moody's forecasts that the world economy will contract by 0.5% this year, a significant drop from the initial estimate of 2.1% growth. It adds the economies of the US, Eurozone, the UK, and Japan will shrink by over 2%. Countries are rolling out enormous fiscal and monetary policy packages to cushion the coronavirus fallout. The U.S. has approved a rescue package worth $2 trillion, which amounts to roughly 10% of the country's GDP.
The total package here comes to roughly $6 trillion, $2 trillion direct assistance, roughly $4 trillion in Federal Reserve lending power. Again, it will be the largest Main Street financial package in the history of the United States.
To facilitate domestic consumption, Japan is considering issuing cash and gift certificates to the public and subsidizing travel expenses. It's a stimulus package worth $270 billion with greater government spending than in 2008 during the global financial crisis. Eurozone countries are looking at extending their bailout funds precautionary credit lines worth some 2% of a country's GDP to countries in need. 오정희, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund has projected that global production this year will contract and then recover next year. That's according to the IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, after Thursday's conference call among the G20 leaders. She said the size of the contraction and how fast it will recover depends on how quickly COVID-19 is contained. She stressed that fiscal policy needs to be targeted to help vulnerable households and businesses. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Won-tae Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, the Dow overnight up almost 6.5%, 3 sessions in a row now of gains after these weeks of historic instability. In fact, these 3 days were the biggest 3-day jump since the 1930s. Did we hit the bottom here? What's the story on Wall Street and the Korean markets?
Right. If you look at the news flow yesterday, you had one of the worst unemployment data coming out from U.S. The total amount of the non-job requirement came out to be, total jobless claim came out to be 3.28 million, which was much higher than the market forecast of 1 million. So the U.S. unemployment ratio is expected to rise to sharply at least double of the current number, which is 3.5%, to at least 7% plus going forward. Even it might hit more than 10% unemployment ratios if we think about all the closures that's happening due to the coronavirus impact. Despite such a negative news, we are seeing a very sharp rise of the U.S. equity market. As you said, Dow was up 6.4%, S&P was up 6.2%, and NASDAQ was up 5.6%. And clearly, we are seeing quite a significant rise because despite all the concern about the economic weakness, all the beneficiary measures that U.S. government is putting on, as well as the Fed is putting on, is extremely high level of numbers. You're talking about 10% of GDP numbers as direct support. In addition to that, 20% of GDP as financing, which this is a record high level that you have never seen in the past of history. So clearly, this is the reason why the equity market is rising despite the expected slowdown or a depression that you will see in second quarter of this year. In terms of whether this market will continue to rise, will all depend on what happens to third quarter of this year. If the coronavirus is contained and you see a very sharp recovery of economic growth rate in third quarter, then yes, the equity market can continue to go up. But for the time being, we think that there will be some volatilities, the residual volatility that might be coming through over the next couple of months or so, because we already know for sure that the economy will slow down significantly or actually shrink in second quarter.
Right. Well, in the meantime, we see the Korean currency a lot stronger today than it has been, closing in on 1,200 now. Is that going to continue?
Right. After the signing this currency swap, we have seen quite a appreciation of Korean won. And in the meantime, it did depreciate once again to the 1270 territories, but it came back down. Now, as you said, we're seeing close to 1200 level. We think that more normal, reasonable level of currency is that 1200 or even below that. So more likely scenario should be 1180 to 1230 range bound because of the current conditions of Korean economy. Even though we are concerned about domestic consumption to be very, very low number this year, we think that the export seems to be fairly reasonably strong despite all the coronavirus impact. The reason for that is because of the strong semiconductor business that's continuing. Yes, there is concern about slowdown in second quarter, but nevertheless, the change in the industry dynamics would allow the DRAM industry to expand continuously in the future, particularly in the second half of this year. Having said that, we think that won should not depreciate any further, nor appreciate any further. It should be in a range bound around 1,200, plus minus 2% on the range in the future.
Got it. Well, talking about oil for a minute, it rose for a few days this week, then going back down to where it was. The U.S. suspending plans to buy crude for its strategic reserves. That was ultimately not included in the stimulus package. Where do you see oil going from here?
Right. It's very hard to say. I think that Saudi Arabia and Russia, if they think about their structure of economy, they must have come up with some kind of reduction in production. If you look at Saudi, you need to have oil price above $50 to have a positive budget surplus. And for Russia, if you look at the 70% of GDP is related to the oil. Now, if the oil price goes down by that much, then it really affects negatively on their economic numbers. So clearly, these two countries need to come to negotiation table and decide on the reduction of productions. Still, their egos are too high at this point in time. And as for the impacting the U.S. economy, we really think that the shale gas company going bust is not going to make a GDP growth rate to be much bigger negative than what it is now. We are estimating all the shale gas company goes bust, that impact is only 0.5% of GDP for U.S. So clearly, if there's a consolidation, it's not going to really make much of a differences. So I think that you really need to see Saudi Arabia and Russia coming into the negotiation table and deciding on cutting the production. We think that they cannot last for too long. So eventually they will come to agreement. If that happens, then oil price should recover well above $35.
All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll speak again next week.
Thank you very much.
Now, the coronavirus outbreak is forcing many South Korean companies to temporarily close their factories overseas. Hyundai Motor had already suspended operations at most of its plants in Europe and in the U.S. this month. Now it's doing the same in Russia and Turkey. Samsung Electronics said today that it's closing another plant in Brazil for 2 weeks starting Monday. It had closed one in northern Brazil earlier this week. Meanwhile, LG Electronics announced today that it'll temporarily shut down its washing machine plant in the U.S. state of Tennessee from Monday to April 12th. That plant, with some 600 workers, makes around 100,000 washing machines a month. Hanjin Group's chairman, Won-tae, has won a power struggle with his sister to remain in control of the group, which owns the country's flag air carrier, Korean Air. Cho secured more than 56% of support at a meeting of shareholders of Hanjin Kal, the group's holding company, on Friday. He fended off a leadership challenge from his sister, former Korean Air Vice President Cho Hyun-ah. All 5 people supported by Won-tae were also chosen as outside board members. South Korea's state pension fund, which has a 2.9% stake in Hanjin Kal, had said Thursday that it would vote in favor of Won-tae. Now, South Korea has had a shortage of protective face masks because of the coronavirus outbreak. Among those trying to help are a group of African refugees in the country who are making cotton masks and giving them to people in need. Kim Bo-kyung reports.
A group of refugees from across Africa have gathered together in a small room in Dongducheon City, Gyeonggi-do Province. On the table is a sewing machine, some fabric, and rubber bands, all of them used to make cotton masks. Members of the Dongducheon refugee community decided to make these cotton masks for South Koreans who are having a hard time getting hold of masks amid the COVID-19 outbreak. They say they wanted to share the burden and show Koreans that they are standing by them, supporting them to combat COVID-19 together as one.
Actually, we live in South Korea, and South Koreans been so good to us, more especially our community, and we decided that it would be good. We made masks by our hand, and we donate to the South Koreans.
At first, they made these out of materials they already had. And when they ran out of materials, they were able to continue with help from non-governmental organization Global Hope. The only sewing machine they have belongs to one of the members of the community, and she finds it very satisfying to make these masks.
I see myself in this country making these masks. I'm so happy because it's an opportunity for me to show my talents. I have to say to everyone and to love each other. You do all you can do to help in this situation because
These people have divided the labor into 3 parts to make the work easier. One cuts the fabric, another adds the rubber bands, and the third uses the sewing machine to finish the mask.
After all the work is done, they slide the masks into a small plastic bag. Then they put the masks in a box along with the daily supplies such as soap, toothpaste, and instant rice that Global Hope has provided. They have already delivered over 100 cotton masks to households in need. And they plan to continue this work until the COVID-19 outbreak dies down. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching.
전 세계 아미 여러분 그리고 이 영상을 보고 계신 모든 분들 인사드리도록 하겠습니다.